Hi, friends. Welcome back to Life Intended. I'm your host, Kelly Berry. Life Intended is a podcast that explores what it means to be true to yourself and live an authentic and purposeful life. Each episode explores my guest's version of personal growth, self-discovery, the pursuit of becoming the best version of themselves, and how to find the joy in the journey. Today's podcast is unique. If this is the first one of my podcasts that you are listening to or you've stumbled upon, it's very different than what I normally do. My podcasts are usually interview style, and my goal is to have my guests speak about 90% of the time and to highlight their expertise and perspective. But this episode is all me. I'll give a warning in the beginning. It is very personal. It discusses death. It discusses cancer diagnosis, and it discusses grief and my journey with grief. So I want you to be aware of that. And I recorded this episode yesterday. I'm coming back to record an intro today because it is so personal to me. I wanted to listen back to it, to sleep on it, and to make sure that this is the message that I wanted to put out in the world. And while I've decided that it is, I wanted to come back and just add a few things that I either didn't say or feel I may have misrepresented just a little bit. So I wanted to come back and add those into the beginning. I'll start by saying this episode is all about the loss of my best friend, Lori. She passed away 1 year ago today. And so I talk about, I just mentioned my podcast is about my guest's version of personal growth, self-discovery, and all of that. And I've had a year of doing that, actually 2+ years now of doing that as it pertains to Lori and her diagnosis specifically. And so I wanted to talk about that, hopefully help share some perspective and maybe some insight because grief is a part of life and it's something that we all experience and it's hard no matter who it is, no matter what chapter of your life, how it happened, it is hard and we all process grief differently. So a couple of things that I didn't say in the episode that I wanted to come back and add in is the first one, being a support person, or I'll even say like somebody's primary support while they're going through something difficult is really hard. And it takes a lot of emotional capacity. And I think that we don't oftentimes recognize what that feels like in the moment, or even what we're asking of other people when we have people who are there supporting us. And I felt like it was important to talk about because this not only applies to when someone has maybe a terminal illness or a diagnosis and you are one of their support people or one of their family support people or a family member. It is a difficult role to play. And I think that we should all recognize and give ourselves some grace when we're in that role. Just the emotions and the mental bandwidth and a lot of that. And I think this even carries over into being a caregiver. Maybe I know that we're in what's called the sandwich generation. A lot of people my age are caregivers for their parents while also raising children. And there are just a lot of demands in that role. It's something to be aware of and to give ourselves grace, make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. And that's something that I learned along this way. I had no idea that I was going to be in this position. I totally winged it. But it was like when Lori passed away and everything, I guess, kind of shifted, I realized how much of my personal energy and bandwidth had been involved in being that support person for her husband, for their families. And it was a lot. And it was something that I had to kind of figure out how to handle alongside grief once Lori passed away. So that's the first thing I didn't really talk about, but I wanted to come back and add. The other thing is, this is kind of like an episode that has 2 parts to it. And in the first part, I talk about my relationship with Lori. In the second part, I talk about my experience with grief. And as I was talking through that and talking about a lot of relationships in my life and friendships and how people did or did not show up for me during this time, I made it sound like nobody showed up for me. And I wanted to come back and say, that is not the case. I had people who were in my corner who checked in on me, who were that. And I don't want to make it appear as though I took that for granted or that I didn't have anybody showing up for me, because that wasn't the case. I think I just used blanket statements as I was talking about that to help illustrate my point. And I don't think that that's fair, and that's not the way that I would like to represent that. So I wanted to come back and say that as well. But this episode will kind of have a double intro. I intro it again in just a minute that you'll hear, but I just wanted to say thanks again. Thanks for listening, for support. Not only for my podcast, but over the past year plus as we've navigated Lori's diagnosis, illness, and eventual passing. And I hope that you take some things away from this. And for those of you that knew Lori, hope that some of my talking about my relationship with her brings back great memories of her, of your own. So thank you for listening. Hi, friends, and welcome back to Life Intended. I'm your host, Kelly Berry, and I am back today with another solo episode. And this one is very near and dear to my heart and deeply personal. Today actually is July 2nd, 2024. Tomorrow, July 3rd, will be 1 year since the passing of my best friend, Lori. I have been thinking about doing something with the podcast to remember her and honor her, and I decided that this was the best way to do it. In full transparency, I am sitting here, I'm not recording my video, I do not have an outline, I am not really sure how this is going to go, but I've been putting it off and decided I was just going to go for it. So what I'm going to try to do today is record kind of two parts to this episode, if you will. It's all going to be in one episode, but I want to do the first part as kind of like a tribute to Lori. Talk about our friendship, how much she meant to me. Hopefully, give those who knew and loved her something to listen to as we approach or get to 1 year without her, and to be able to smile and laugh at some things while also just remembering her. I think for me, it's really important that, in our house, we talk about Lori. We talk about Lori with Vivian and just keep her memory alive and close. And so that's what I want to do in this first half of the episode. And in the second half, or whatever's left, how much ever time I give it, I want to talk about my experience in losing someone so close, what it was like after her diagnosis, and what it's been like in the years since she's been gone. Because I think that grief is something that it's very personal and people process it very differently. But I think as humans in relationships and friendships, we can generally do better in showing up for people who are grieving. And I think that, I don't think this, hopefully, talking about some of my experience and some resources that I have used can help us just all be a little bit more aware, maybe give us some additional tools to use to show up for the people in our lives who need it when they need it. And so that's what my goal is today. We'll see how well I do this. So let's get into talking about part one, which is my friendship with Lori. Lori was one of my dearest friends. She was not a lifelong friend. Lori and I met probably, it's been about maybe 12 years ago now. Lori, I don't really know how to talk about Lori without just talking about a lot of random things in my life. But I met Lori through her husband, Damon. Damon is also one of my best friends. Damon, I will say, kind of adopted me as a really close friend, as we both had a lot of things in common. We were training at the same place, both doing a lot of running, races and things like that. And if you know Damon, he can just sometimes have these ideas and all of a sudden you're a part of them, and then before you know it, you're slightly in charge of them and you have no idea how any of this happened. But rewind, Damon decided one day that he wanted to start a running club. We lived in an area where there were a decent amount of runners, but we did not have a dedicated running club. We didn't even at this time have like a local running store. And I was living in Kentucky at the time. And so Damon said he wanted to start a running club, bluegrass running club. I was definitely involved from the beginning. We made t-shirts. It was super fun. But he had this idea, decided he wanted to do it, I don't know, like 2 days, maybe 3 days before the very first group run. He's like, I have this meeting in Texas. I have to leave. I can't be at the run. Can you be there? And so I'm like, great. We go. I'm not really in charge yet, but all of a sudden I'm thrown into it. We're running at a course I've never been on, with people that I've never met. So I show up, and pretty much from then on, the running club was mine and Damon's, and we roped in another friend, Megan, who she probably felt like I did. There were times we couldn't show up. We're like, can you take charge, lead these runs? And it was just a really great season of life. But through the running club, we attracted a lot of runners from local communities, I'll say, and Lori started coming to running club. And that was my first introduction to Lori. Lori is an extremely accomplished runner. She had an amazing running career, most of it trail running, ultra running, but she was just a really impressive runner, did a lot of great things. And Lori started coming to our running club and we connected from the beginning. But it wasn't till several months later, I think, that Damon called me one day and was like, Lori and I are kind of seeing each other. And so that's how their relationship started. And basically from there, Lori and I just became extremely close. I would not be surprised. I have no idea how many text messages we've exchanged, individual group texts as a part of many different groups, but I would not be surprised if somebody said, 10,000, 50,000 plus. I don't know. But she was just my person. One of those people you meet and as an adult become friends with, have so much in common, enjoy spending so much time together. But we did a lot. We ran together a lot. She graciously slowed down for me a lot. Just like my biggest cheerleader, we started traveling a lot together. And so she did a lot of longer distance trail running, and especially in the beginning of her and Damon's relationship, Damon and I were doing a lot of longer distance triathlon. And so we would travel to these races. Then I'm talking like Maryland. We thought we were going to one in Tennessee, ended up being in Mississippi, I think. Just kind of all over the place. And Damon and I would race, and Nick and Lori would spectate, and Lori would be in charge, thank goodness, and make sure that Nick knew where to go, when to be there, all the navigation part of it. It was kind of funny. She was always basically in charge of him, making sure he got where he needed to be to see us or whatever was going on. But we did a lot of racing together, a lot of traveling. At the same time, we were doing a lot of like longer distance trail relays, like the Ragnar relays, and we would go. Some of you may remember our disastrous trip to West Virginia, where a tornado came through during the race and basically wrecked our campsite. We had just a lot of incredible experiences, a lot of funny memories. We did a race from Asheville, North Carolina to Greenville, South Carolina, called Ville to Ville, with a crew that was really fun as well. But the point of all of this is, we just spent a lot of time together. Additionally, a lot of you will remember the Backyard Classic, which was a race that was actually in Damon and Lori's backyard. Their house backed up to a nature park, and they had this idea that they wanted to create a endurance, like an 8-hour looped ultra run. And that race was the beginning of a wonderful experience and a legacy, I think, that we left behind in Kentucky. Some of our best experiences were getting together, planning that race, running that race, creating the community that we created as a part of that race. That was me and Lori and Damon and our other friend, Ben Bryan, that did that for 5 years. And a lot of you all will remember after that very first year, actually, it was 2 days later that Lori had surgery for her cervical cancer. So she was diagnosed right before that race happened and ended up 2 days later getting a radical hysterectomy before she started undergoing radiation treatment for cervical cancer. And that was a pretty scary time for everybody, I think, who knew her. She had some pretty unexpected complications after surgery that were kind of scary, but just in general, it was just a scary time. A lot of unknowns. The known that you knew with Lori is that she was a fighter and she was going to take it head on, and she was going to do everything that she needed to do and more to make sure that she came out on the other side. And I got to go to a couple of and her last radiation treatment with her, and it was all just pretty special. She did beat cervical cancer, went on to less than a year later actually won a 50-mile trail race, outright won. So both male and female won the race. She actually fell on the race course and broke her, I can't even remember at the moment, collarbone, elbow, shoulder, something like this. Pretty significant injury, but she ran through that and won the race. I wasn't able to be there. It was in Florida. We had a meeting, but some friends of ours FaceTimed me at the finish and a couple of times during the race. And it was just amazing. She was a light. She was so fun. And the best part, I think, about our friendship was that Lori was my biggest fan, biggest supporter, really, for, I don't know, any races, really anything I had going on in my life. She was just the first person to reach out, give encouragement. I've even, since she's passed and have gone through some things, found cards from her I didn't even remember getting. But just one of those people that just knows what to say, when to say it, and how to show up for somebody. And she taught me a lot about that, to be honest, about what kind of friend I needed, a little bit about like the type of friend that I wanted to be and wanted to become, the type of friend that, she's the one that you can laugh over anything until you can't talk, and just really an amazing, amazing person to be around. And so I think from here, since I have no notes and no script and no agenda, I think what I'm going to do is fast forward to 2021. And throughout most of Lori and Damon's relationship, they were boyfriend and girlfriend. And, marriage came up a lot. There was just a lot of talk about it, a lot of reasons. That wasn't exactly what they were planning on doing. But I remember, I think it was early October of 2021, I got a text message from Damon. Hey, are you busy? And I think I was at the grocery or something. I'm like, yeah, I'm at the grocery. What's up? He's like, well, just call us when you get home. And to be honest, I didn't think much about it. I think I forgot. I'm home for maybe an hour. I get another text. Damon's like, are you home from the grocery? I'm like, oh yeah. He's like, okay, well, we're going to call you. And so Damon and Lori FaceTimed and told us that they got married the day before. And it was just really, really exciting news, pretty out of nowhere for us. And, hindsight is 2020, like they say. And I'm beyond thankful that they got married when they did. But the really interesting thing about that phone call and that news is that it was only a couple weeks prior to that Nick and I found out that we were expecting. And we had not told anybody. We were getting ready to fly to Kentucky and tell our families. And, it just could have been very easy for them to like deliver that basically like the most exciting news for them and life-changing news really for us to be like, wow, that's really big. Like, guess what? We're having a baby. Because as shocking as it was to a lot of people, I don't think it was on their radar at all that we were going to have a baby. And so we flew to Kentucky. I'm going to say it wasn't 2 weeks later, probably less than 2 weeks later. Got together, told our families, and invited Damon and Lori over to Nick's family. And I think they thought we were, going to congratulate them for getting married, which we did, of course. But we also told them that we were expecting a baby. And I just remember Lori, she was beyond shocked, crying. I don't think outside of our immediate families that there was anybody more excited for us to be having a baby than Lori. I mean, she was just not only so excited for us, but she was just so excited that I was going to be a mom. She was just really thankful that I was going to be able to get that experience, really supportive about the type of mom she thought that I was going to be, and just incredibly and genuinely excited for us. So from there, I guess we'll fast forward to, I guess it would be a year from today or tomorrow, or maybe even the 4th. My timeline, I'm not sure of at the moment. But I had Vivian in May of 2022. And Vivian was about I guess she would have been about 6 weeks old in 2022 at this time of year. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night to feed her, and I checked my phone and I had a text message from Damon. And it said, Lori went to the ER today and had a CAT scan that revealed a brain tumor and was immediately stat flighted to Louisville. And we're waiting on some information to see basically what's going on. That was the gist of this text. So I got that just a little after midnight. So I waited until the morning when Nick woke up and told him. And it was, just out of the blue. And it was very scary, as you can imagine. And it was scary for a number of reasons. One, because of the way that they were handling it. Lori drove herself to the hospital. She had been having pretty intense headaches and migraines, and probably everybody's worst nightmare when that's happening. The result was, indeed a brain tumor. But, one of the scary parts and the unknowns was, Lori was a cancer survivor. So was the cancer it was assumed at this time that it was cancer. The doctors felt, pretty, with a pretty significant degree of confidence that it was cancer. Whether it was a new primary cancer, which was probably for Lori's sake the best case scenario, or if it was metastasis of her original cervical cancer. And so it did take a little bit of time to get the test results back to determine that Lori did indeed have a new primary cancer. She was diagnosed with grade 4 glioblastoma. And if you know anything about brain cancer or glioblastoma, that's a pretty terrible diagnosis. If you Google what that means, it's pretty grim. And it was a pretty scary time. I felt really, I'll say, like, sad, stressed, and helpless. We were in Florida. We had a 6-week-old I just mentioned. Vivian at that time was just beginning a journey with food allergies that was also very stressful. And I remember, many days walking outside with her, just crying. She was crying. I was crying. Just really, really sad. So the diagnosis was devastating. But if you know Damon, you know there's nobody that you would want in your corner with a diagnosis like that than him. And Damon just became what every person should have in their partner in a situation like this. He was relentless in making sure that she had the care that she needed, that they had access to whatever treatments could give her the best chance for living, for recovery, whatever the case may be. And he was relentless. I think if you have experienced any kind of situation like this, you know that our healthcare system and our insurance system is not set up to support you. That beyond the mental burden and devastation you feel when something like this happens, the amount of bandwidth that you have to use to advocate and fight for the person that means more to you than anyone is exhausting. And, Damon he just did a phenomenal job. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. It was inspiring. I think, I went into that kind of action mode as well. What can I do? How can I help? How can I research? Who do we know? But I'm confident that Lori had the last year of life that she had because he made sure that she had every chance possible. And so from here, a lot of this is not my story to tell. These are not my details to share. But Lori, she had a hard year. She had an initial surgery to remove the tumor. After that surgery, she was never able to regain the ability to walk. So she was wheelchair bound. She did a ton of therapy, had a lot of treatments, a lot of different types of treatments. They traveled to get second opinions. And, in the end, well, I will say this because I just gave Damon a lot of credit for the amount of research and advocacy that he did on her behalf, but he always made sure she was in the driver's seat. Everything that Lori did, treatment-wise, was all her decision. And I think as much as he researched and wanted to give her the best options, I don't think he ever pressured her to make any decisions, but just, was there to be there for her and to support her with whatever she wanted to do. And I think it takes a lot of courage and a lot of love to be able to do what he did for her. So we'll just fast forward to the end of June last year. Lori was on a treatment, an infusion that she was getting, and prior to each infusion, they would do a scan to see if the cancer was progressing, because it was just a situation where if the cancer was progressing, they were going to discontinue the treatment. And at this point in her journey, she did not have many, if any, favorable options left. And so she went for a scan on a Tuesday morning, and the scan revealed progression, and it was Lori's decision to end treatment. And they did. This was a Tuesday. Communicated or called hospice, got Lori set up for end-of-life care. And, throughout the week, it was like Wednesday, Damon texted and said, "You would not believe the difference in her from yesterday to today. It was just like she was fighting so hard, and it got to a point where there wasn't any more that could be done, and she was done. And so, I was just in communication. We're in Florida. They're in Kentucky. I was in communication with Damon's mom. Just tell me what you think I need to do. Do I need to come there? Do I need to wait? And so we kind of just were on call. I think Thursday of that week was the last time Lori ate. Friday was the last time she talked. And I was just waiting. And so Sunday morning, Damon said, I think it's time. So Nick and I and Vivian, we packed up. We jumped in the car on Sunday afternoon at about, 3 p.m. and drove overnight. And, there's a lot to this story, but the abbreviated version is we drove overnight. I was in constant communication with Damon and his mom, and Damon just kept saying, how far are you? How far are you? When are you going to be here? And so as we got closer, it was just before, maybe like sometime around 5 a.m., maybe a little bit after that. And we were getting closer, and I said to Nick, I just want to drive to your parents' house because they live, maybe 15 minutes from where Damon lived. Drive to your parents, drop Vivian off, and then go to Damon's. And Nick's like, why? We're on this, we're coming straight here so we can go right to Damon's. I'm like, I just, I don't know what the situation is going to be. I don't think we need to have Vivian there. At this point, she was, 13 months old. And, I just think we need to go drop her off. And, Damon was saying, I think I told him maybe, that's what I was thinking. He was just like, come straight here. And Nick told me after that he was not going to take us to his parents' house. But so anyway, we ended up going straight to Damon's house and went into Lori's room, and I took Vivian with me, and we sat on the bed with her, and Vivian rubbed her arm, and I rubbed her arm, and we sat there, and I just talked to her. I told her how proud I was of her, how much I loved her, and Lori's daughters were there, and we just sat together, just being together, and just, saying things that I wanted to say. So grateful for the opportunity to make it there. And I ended up taking Vivian out of the room, talking to Lori's mom, talking to Damon's mom, and I went back in, sat down. Damon was on the phone with hospice. It was time to give Lori another dose of medication, which he did. And I was sitting on the bed with her, and she took her last breath 42 minutes after we got there. And I think I was in shock that everything happened the way that it did. It felt very surreal. Yeah, I think I just could not believe that after everything that had happened and the way that everything went, that we timed our trip and I was able to say goodbye. And it's something, I think it's something that prior to us leaving that whole week, I think I just had expected, like I was going to get a phone call. I was going to wake up one morning and she was going to be gone. That I had almost just planned that it was going to happen without me there. And I owe Nick and Damon so much gratitude for just making sure that we got there, that we went straight there, that Nick didn't take me to his parents' house. There's just a lot of things that could happen along the way that could have prevented us from being there. So I was just grateful to have that experience. But it was a shock. And we spent the next week in Kentucky planning Lori's service, and spending time with friends and family, and it was exhausting, but it was really great closure, I will say. And so it's been a tough year over the past year, to say the least. I think a lot of people can probably relate to this, but it is hard to manage grief, period. It feels really complex to manage grief alongside what I would say is probably the best experience of my life, which is having and raising Vivian. Basically since Vivian was 6 weeks old, I've had a lot of grief about Lori. It's from her initial diagnosis, it's like the grief starts. Like, you've already lost something. You've already lost someone. The way that things are going to be in the future are never going to be like they were in the past. And it's a lot to think about. It's a lot to handle. It's a lot to try to balance feelings of just immense sadness along feelings of incredible happiness that our daughter brings into our life. And there's, I mentioned it in the beginning, we talk about Lori a lot, and I think that's important in grief, to continue to remember and make topics like that acceptable and not taboo, which I'll talk about more in a minute. But it's been a hard couple of years balancing all of that. And this morning I sent out a newsletter for my Life Intended subscribers, and I told them in this newsletter that I was going to put out this episode because I knew I had to tell somebody, or else I probably wasn't going to do it, because it just feels really, really personal, really vulnerable. And if I didn't have that accountability, I could easily just say, I just didn't think it was going to be very good, didn't really think it was going to serve any purpose. But I think what I want to do is try to use my experience just to bring some awareness about grief and tools that I know of, and help people think about both how they manage grief, how they recognize it, sit with it, and how they help support others during grief. Something that has just been an additional thing that I've had going on in my life, basically since Lori's diagnosis, is just a real, I'll say, struggle or disappointment in a lot of the friendships and relationships that I had in my life. I mentioned, Lori was not a lifelong friend. She was a friend I made as an adult. Her and my friendship did not overlap with a lot of other friendships that I had in my life. We just weren't part of my other friendship circles. It was kind of like I was an outlier, and I felt like I was really disappointed, to be honest, in the way that people in my life did not show up to support me, or just show up and know that I needed support. And in my newsletter this morning, I mentioned a resource. It's a book called Option B. It was written by Sheryl Sandberg, who you may know as the COO of Facebook, and Adam Grant, who is just really one of my favorite authors and people in general. I love the way he thinks about things and his whole entire approach. But they wrote this book together, and it was as a result of Cheryl's husband passed away suddenly while they were on vacation. He was the CEO of SurveyMonkey. She's the CEO of Facebook. They're very high profile people. And, she talks about also her experience being supported through grief, and the way she talks about it, and the tools and the tactics that she suggests in this book. I read it probably 6 or 7 years ago. I wasn't dealing with grief at the time. It taught me so much about how to show up for people. And I think it is a resource if you've been through a tragedy, or if you have dealt with grief, or if you have people in your life who are doing the same. It is such a great book to help give you the tools and the way to think about, really like how do I want to be? How can I be? And I just recommend it for everybody. But a couple of things that she says in the book that I want to bring to light are, the first one is talk about the person who passed away. And so I think we're all guilty of this. We can all think that avoiding the topic is a safe way to go. But she says, you are not going to remind me that my husband died. Bringing up his name is not going to remind me of what happened. I know what happened. I think about it all the time. Bringing up his name or talking about him conversation is going to let me know that you remember him, that we're not letting his memory die. And that has really stuck with me. But I have used that since then. When I've had friends whose parents have passed away, I will send a text. I will, on Mother's Day, I will say, I'm so sorry. This is your first Mother's Day without your mom. It's like, I'm thinking of you is great. It's better, than a lot of other ways that you might be able to handle it. But being really direct, like, I'm sorry that you're having to go through your first Father's Day without your father here. Or, I'm sorry that this is the first Christmas without your mom. It just brings this level of, maybe I can't relate because I've not done those things, but I am thinking about what it is you're dealing with and what is affecting you right now. You're going through your first Christmas without your mom, or your first Father's Day without your father, whatever it may be. And I just think that is something that she said that will stick with me forever, is you're not going to remind the person of their loss. They can't forget it. And what they want is for other people to not forget it as well, or not at least forget how they may be feeling about it. So that's one thing that I think is really important. And the other thing is how you show up for somebody. She talks about being in, I can't remember, like being at home and people saying, let me know if there's anything I can do for you. Let me know if I can bring you anything. What can I do for you? And while the sentiment of all of that is good and genuine and helpful, you're putting the burden of figuring out what somebody needs on them in the time where they really don't need to be doing any more figuring out. She was like, what I wanted or what I needed was somebody to take my kids to their extracurriculars or show up with a meal. She had a friend actually, and I think this is how she kind of like decided that this is what people need. She had a friend say, I'm in the lobby. Come down here. I want to give you a hug. It's like, you don't really need to say like, can I stop by and see you? Because you're putting that decision-making burden on that other person. But it's more like, I'm here for you and I'm showing up and this is how I'm doing it. And, then you can tell them like, if, maybe you want to take your kids to the extracurriculars, but I don't know, it's just a lot different than putting that burden on somebody else. But, some additional things I'll say that I learned and I would just like to pass along is commenting on people's social media posts is not the same as personal outreach, period. If you are a good and true friend to somebody and you have their cell phone number, text them. Call them. If you don't, social media is great. Like, it's a great place for that. But it's not a great place for that if you're avoiding a text or a phone call instead. And there is no timeline on grief, but things don't necessarily people don't just move on. They don't just go back to life after they make their next happy Facebook post. They just need to be continued to checked on. They need people to continue to check on them. So yeah, I think it's easy to get busy and move on and think that the other person must be okay. They must be over it. And, that's not the case. And I think, there's just been, for me personally, a whole lot of re-examining relationships that I have, expectations I've had of people. Some of those are not fair expectations. I'm not here to say that I was let down by everybody in my life and, woe is me. What I'm saying is there were expectations I had of people, and my expectations were not met. Some of those, I think, were justified, and a lot of those were I did not have appropriate expectations. I was holding on to a lot of relationships and friendships that I think maybe just, they just weren't what they used to be. And I think that that's the way all friendships and relationships are. I think they have seasons, but it introduced like additional disappointment and sadness in my life as a result of that. And I'll tell you like how that impacted me because, in my podcast trailer, I talked about, one of the reasons I did this podcast is this loss that I had, but also, there are just other things that were going on in my life that make you stop and say, Lori was 44 years old when she passed away. And that is so young. She had so much life left. And I do too. I just turned 43. I have so much life ahead of me. I have a very young daughter. I just wanted to stop thinking about doing things and start doing things. But one other like extremely significant life event, and I'm going to talk about this now because it has to do with what I'm talking about, these relationships, is 2 weeks and 1 day after Lori passed away, my brother-in-law was diagnosed with stage 4 colorectal cancer. And that was also devastating. He is doing amazing. And he has an inspirational, I'll leave it at that, inspirational outlook and attitude. It's incredible. But I specifically remember after his diagnosis thinking, like, I don't have anybody to tell. Like, I don't want to reach out to my friends who I feel extremely let down by. Like, I can't subject myself to any more disappointment. And that was just a really very low point. Like, I'm afraid if I tell people in my life and they don't show up for me the way that I need, like, drop expectations, like the way that I need people to show up for me, like, it's gonna be even more like devastating to me. And so I used that and am still using that as just, I guess, my own inspiration and dedication to creating real and meaningful relationships in my life, to nurturing friendships that I want to grow, friendships that I want to deepen. And I learned a lot. And I guess the entire point of that part is to just, I think it's important. Grief is a part of life. We can't avoid it. And grief shows up a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be just the loss of a person. It can be the loss of a relationship. It can be the loss of a future that you anticipated. It can be the loss of a lot of things. And I think that there are a lot of opportunities in life to show up for the people that we love in ways that are meaningful and show them that they are important to us. And that book is a great resource. There's just a lot of really great resources, but my goal today is just to stop and ponder and reflect, whether it's our own experiences or others and how we've shown up in the world in both of those scenarios. So thank you for listening. I hope for those of you that knew Lori, this honored her and celebrated her. I know over the next couple days we will be doing that in our house and just continuing to remember her and her legacy. And I hope that we all are taking away something about grief and experiences and maybe can show up a little differently in the future. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.